we are here. We are live, and today is the launch day for Four Scored on 4-4. There's a lot of fours. Four Scored comes out today. Came out today. Came out at midnight last night. It is the sequel to my self-published fantasy blog off number 8, semifinalist Thrice, which came out back in the end of 2021, actually. So it's been about 2 years. Not quite 2 years, year and a half, because it was the end of 2021 and we're barely into 2023. So Thrice, for those of you who are seeing me for the first time or these books for the first time, Thrice is a Slavic fantasy man and boy on road story. Little boy has way too much magic for his little soul to handle, or so it would seem, but he has way too much magic and it's not harming him as it does others, and people are out to get him. So his father, his adoptive father, who's a needlesmith, takes him on the road to try to get away, and then decides, to hell with that, let's go right at him and go right into the bear's cave and just tell him to stop and see what happens. So that's the first book, and it was a semifinalist in SPFBO, self-published fantasy blog off, number 8, which is still going on. This month, I think they're going to be announcing the winner, or the winner of that, by the end of this month. And then next year, the next one will start, and I'll be entering my other series into that. And then, as of today, Four Scored came out. It takes place 13 months later, which is apropos, because that's about how many months it is total between books, between releasing two. And it is, again, about Joven and Leif, the father and son, and they've moved off to another district to try to start a normal life. And there is a group, a coven of Vedmak, which is Eastern European word for warlock or witch, and they want the little boy and his magic when they find out he has it, and they have means of getting to it better than other people can. And so, of course, Joven once more decides to tell him to stop. So we meet some new characters, we meet some old characters, and yeah, that's Four Scored. Again, I am Andrew Meredith, and yeah, Andrew D. Meredith. I am the author of both of those books. I've been writing for a long time, officially really diving into the author life in 2017, and now we're here. So it looks like we have Anitha. Anitha's here. Quinn, Joe. Oh, thank you so much for coming, guys. If you have any questions, this is a live Q&A, so feel free to ask, and I will try to answer those that are deemed generally appropriate. So yeah, feel free to ask me questions, and yeah, we can go from there. I have no plans tonight. I've got some candy here for me to eat. I cracked a can of Coke open, and yeah, so I'm just here to hang out, and might do some readings too, but yeah, that's why I'm here. Just here to celebrate the fact that I got another book out. I was telling, I think it was Anitha earlier today, that this is the first book that's actually felt like the first actual follow-up release to my initial book, right? Because I released Thrice, and you're kind of speaking to the void at that point. And then I did release more books the following summer, but I always felt like I was playing catch up, trying to not only get them out, but re-releasing the Collation Saga from its original way that it was released. And then so this is the first time it's felt like there's actually a real book release with a community that I know and I love, and I want to give more books to. So, all right, Anitha has a question. Who is my favorite character to write? That's a good question. In the Needle and Leaf series, it's probably Slant. Slavik Univ, nicknamed Slant, is just he's so easy to write. All I have to do is just put him into a scene, and he does his own thing. So he's the easiest person to write in that series. Not that Joven. I mean, it's a pretty easy series to write in the first place because all the characters I'm drawing from a lot of my own experience. Because I'm always so rage filled and smithing needles, right? Overall, my favorite character to write in all of my books is probably Jinid, but Jinid's right up, or Joven's right up there with him. They're both J names, right? But Joven's right up there with Jinid because they are pretty similar. They just handle their own problems differently. So that's what kind of sets them apart. But as a base, they're probably cut from the same cloth. So yeah, that's my question. That's my answer to my question, to your question. Boy, I'm nervous tonight. It's weird. Well, let's see. What can I read that won't spoil anything? But I will read from Foursquare since that's what's out. That's a good question, Quinn. I don't have Slavic background myself. I'm Norwegian Welsh, and then past that European Mutt. But I'd already written a broad epic fantasy with the Collation Saga, and I wanted to do something that was a bit more of a challenge to me. So, and I didn't feel up to snuff trying to build a world on an Asian or just farther east than Europe. So I decided to go a little east into into Eastern Europe. And then I knew I could do a little bit of research. There's a lot of crossover in the Venn diagram of mythology, especially between the Slavic nations. Like if you look at I pulled up, in my little research I did a lot of research since then, but I kind of challenged myself to do everything in like 3 weeks of planning. And so when I was researching, I was looking at, okay, well, what is Russian mythology and legend? What is the steppes, the Balkans? And you start to see a lot of crossover, and even languages, and then looking up words for like what's the word for warlock or witch, which I used Vedmak, which is Polish. But when you start looking at all of the languages that are in the Eastern Europe, everything on the other side of Germany and beyond, even though a lot of them don't come from the same language families, you start to see a lot of similarities in their word structure. I mean, obviously they're very closely related word structure, naming families, but even like comparing Hungarian, which is its own unique culture, language, compared to Russian, you start seeing some similarities in names. And yeah, so that's why I went with Slavic. Was something that I could do was a little off of Western European. That would be just unfamiliar enough for me to challenge me, but familiar enough for me that I can add in some of the tropes that I was understanding when I was reading their mythology. So, hello, Dean Sue. Glad you could make it. I know it's a little late for you now, since I think you're on the East Coast, not normally on the East Coast because you're out here in the mountain. Yeah, so that's where the Slavic came from. I wanted to do something that was going to be a little bit more, it was going to also match Joven. That was a big thing, is that Joven is very straightforward, does his own thing. And so the stoicism of some of the older Russian mythology is what I was trying to capture in him. And yeah, there was a lot of really fun tropes that I'm not used to experiencing, that just gave me a lot of challenge to work with, and I did that. Yeah. Let me, you know what? I'm just going to read. I'm going to start at chapter 1 of Foursquare, and I'm going to read a little bit here. And you're welcome to drop some questions in, and I'll answer those when I finish a little bit of this scene. Chapter 1, Gordola. The forge fire glowed around the edges of the blast door. Joven took hold of the extended door handle and pulled it open, revealing the hot orange glow in its entirety. Taking up the tongs from the anvil, he placed the wire into the saddle hole and put it in the forge mouth. The dragon within gave of its life force, and the steel wire dulled. Soon, it matched the glow of the charcoal inside. He took up the tongs again and moved to the anvil, locking it in the vise. Taking up a smaller set of tongs, he worked the wire over on itself. The doubled-over wire cooled quickly in the air. He placed it back into the forge, and the glow returned. Taking up a small hammer, he took up the 2 wires, tapped at them, and put them into the forge again. He repeated this several times until the 2 wires became one. Where the bend had been made, an eye remained. He placed the dull metal once more into the forge until it glowed. Then the cherry red wire was plunged into the clay container of oil. Once cool, it came out and went to the bench. There he quickly polished it to a gleam, took up a pair of clippers, and cut it to the required length. He held it up to the light of the window, which was already beginning to fade. Finally, he walked over to the new counter he had built over the winter and placed the new needle with the last set, completing it. 8 canvas rolls lay out on display, each dyed a different color, each with 10 needles of various sizes and shapes, and each mirroring the other. The final needle joined its companion on the blue cloth. He touched each set once more to ensure that they looked good to those that entered his shop. He took out candles on the side. He set out candles on the side of the counter and took up a lighting stick, capturing forge fire on the tip, and lit the candles. He put out the stick's flame and approached the back door to the private room. "Leaf," he said, rapping with his knuckle. He heard scrambling and the door opened, revealing the face of the 6-year-old boy with hair of polished gold, now almost shoulder length. "Yes, Papa Jove?" "Will you go into the common room and see if Kavang is around? You told him the needles would be done tomorrow. I expect he knows my reputation is here and hopes that I'll live up to it. Go." He tousled the boy's hair, and he walked past the counter, eyeing the display. Leaf looked over the counter to Joven. "He's going to be impressed," Leaf smiled. "We shall see." So I'll stop there for a minute. With this book, I realized that I made him a needlesmith, but I never actually explained how needles were made or how he did his work. So that was definitely going to be my opening scene, was him making a needle, to show that I'd done the research, and that was a lot of fun to write. And I'll get back to Dean's question in a minute, but Neetha, I chose Needlemaker because I thought it would be funny. When I wrote this book, I wanted a story of a man and a boy on the road. But I think I had just been recently reading Bone, the comic book, and I always found the innkeeper in that funny because he's just so huge, and he makes, puts these little cups out because I think he's a former warrior. So I wanted a giant of a man who makes little needles. And then I stuck with it. I had done a lot of research on, and also I was trying to do something unique. I have a link to a really good set of all the medieval trades that existed, and including some of the much lesser known ones. And I think Needlesmith was in there, or Nettler is what they're called. And it's something unique enough and specialized enough that I could have him be the needlesmith. So yeah. Dean, you pre-ordered through Amazon. I got about 10 physical pre-orders, but I had I think 50 physical. So it was a really good launch. It was a really good launch to have that many go out, and not just from, say, like Amazon ordering them, but then like one-offs going through my through my physical orders. My biggest surprise was the fact that audiobook actually launched today. Usually audiobook takes weeks before it will finally go live. Don't know why. I know part of it is the approval process, and Amazon just takes their time. So it tends to show up fairly quick, in about 48 hours, 72 hours on Apple. Apple Books, you can do audiobooks through there. But this one, all live today. So that was a huge surprise and a really good windfall. I don't know how many sales I'll get from that, but the point is it is live. So I'm not having to wait for audiobook to launch. So that's really good. Let's see. I saw another question. Jesse asked, what was harder to write, Thrice or Fourscored? I don't know between the two of them. Fourscored was harder. Thrice, but their first drafts were about the same. Thrice, I wrote over a single winter as a challenge to myself to do something brand new. And I started it in, I think, December of 2021, and I finished it by February or March. And then it took me that was 2019. 2019 is when I wrote that. And then I didn't publish it to 2021 because I was working on trying to get it through traditional publishing, and then switched to publishing it myself. Fourscore took a little bit longer. I wrote that actually back in, I think, before Thrice came out in 2021. It might have been early 2022, but I had to hold off on publishing that due to what I felt were too many crossing lines of geopolitics in our world that were a little too similar to the plot that I was had already written. So I held it back for an extra year rather than releasing it last November, which was the original plan. Well, last November, back in 2020. I don't know. I time doesn't mean anything anymore. But yeah, I held off doing that and then released it now because it was a good timing, and I felt that with SBFBO ending right now, that I wanted to have a second book out for those that wanted more Needle and Leaf. So that's that. So that's why that was a little bit harder. It just took me longer to get it going. Let's see. I saw another question. I should probably click on these, huh? Does Leaf have any friends? No. It's kind of a sad little childhood for him. But it's Leaf, so he's very happy to just be with Joven. But yeah, it is pretty sad that he doesn't have any friends. I know it's a comment when they go into Koropesh whether he can go play with the other kids, and Joven doesn't think that it's safe and tells him not to. So no, unfortunately, no. It's kind of a sad childhood for him for that reason. Yeah. Though at the same time too, he does mention that he had friends back in Garuz, because he talks about playing with different friends. So he had them when he was a little boy. Once he leaves town, he doesn't have anybody else that he's ever really made friends with. Probably one-offs, especially in Koropesh. Yes, thank you for commenting on my dulcet tones. She's biased though. All right. Quinn asks, what formative fantasy authors were for me? Yeah. So my journey is a little odd. Not odd. It was just, I think in my opinion, I should have read more broadly when I was a kid. But I read David Eddings, the Bulgariad and the Malorian. I didn't ever get into anything else he wrote because it was too repetitive for me, even at that point. And I read Dragonlance. So early on, those two were very influential in the early development of the Collation Saga. So much so that when I look back at it, I know for a fact that it was basically a fanfic. It's one of the reasons I now advocate for people writing fanfic when they're younger, especially pre-college. If you can get into fanfic early and just start writing it, it helps you later kind of decouple yourself, but also learn to follow the same brushstrokes as the masters before you. So like when you look at like art from Michelangelo, all the old classic artists, trying to get myself more centered. All the classic artists, they had to copy their masters, and then they had to copy other pieces. And we do that even today. Like when you're learning how to draw comic books, you copy panels that you love to the point where you can do them identically, right? And I think fanfic does the same thing for kids. I had to decouple myself. It was very hard for me to decouple myself from my original influences to the point that they aren't just pastiche of those influences. And I think if more kids wrote fanfic, then when they do hit college and they start having these other ideas they want to do, they can stop writing fanfic and start writing their own things. And your influences will always be there, but being able to separate yourself is really important. And that still happens today. I might read an author who I can see and tell is still copying and emulating their influences from Sanderson to Abercrombie. There's nothing wrong with following the same brushstrokes. It's knowing you're doing it. Knowing you're doing it so that you can not do it more. Anyway, so my early influences were Eddings and Dragonlance, and then late 90s I was reading a lot of Warhammer 40,000, and then I kind of stopped reading fantasy for about 5-6 years and started reading a lot of historical. From Pillage of the Earth was very influential later on in my writing. Name of the Rose, and then I discovered Brandon Sanderson because someone said, "Oh, you got to read this. No, don't give up on fantasy." And I tried Brandon Sanderson back in 2010, and it was eye opening. There was I read a lot of Hobb too in the late 90s too, so there was some influence there, and Hobb is still very influential to me now, in a very good way, especially very easy to hold the candle of Hobb up to others. Not to say, well, this isn't Hobb, so it's not good, but I will use Hobb as a goalpost to say that, oh, this writer is so much like Hobb, I know I'm going to love it. Yeah. At which point Anith is going to say, well, you're going to say Carissa Chelion, and I am going to say Carissa Chelion because I discovered her only 2 years ago, and I'm so glad that I did. Because if you love Hobb, you got to read Carissa Chelion. So those are my influences. And then now I'm a little bit more broad in what I'm trying to consume. There are a lot of comic book influences. Actually, I've pulled one out here to show as an influence, so thank you for asking that. So if you want more of the style of Thrice and you want a comic book, you need to look into Usagi Yojimbo, which is probably now my favorite comic book series ever written. It's anthropomorphic, but it's a retelling of Japanese history and mythology in an episodic style. So every single issue, like this is just omnibus, but every single issue will be anything from him learning to train how to fight to having a tea ceremony. So I would strongly suggest you read that. And they just started re-releasing Usagi Yojimbo with color. So they went back to the beginning and they're releasing them month by month. In color, and through that they're also re-releasing the omnibuses. So if you can get into Usagi Yojimbo, you will not regret it. It is very family friendly. I think a 9 or 10-year-old can probably read it. Maybe 11. High body count. So that's last was it last night or the night before with Anitha? She was asking me, how is it cozy but still so violent? Usagi Yojimbo is the same way. High body count, but it's done in such a way that you don't feel like it's all blood and guts. It's not. It's really not. So yeah, I suggest doing that. Let's skip ahead to what JCM just said, and I'll go back to questions. That I tried watching the Netflix show, and I was disappointed too. I was really hoping they were just going to move it forward a generation or two and have it be maybe even like during the just pre-Meiji Restoration. The fact they went to a whole new Neo Tokyo story way in the future just tore it away from the original comics intentions. So I wish they hadn't done that. All right. Jesse says, can you think of any book that might have been so bad that it influenced you to write so that there was something better on the market? That's a good question. I don't know that I've done that a whole lot. Joe, who's in the chat, did that. I know that when he was writing, he writes his superheroes based on mistakes he feels that have been made in the comics and in the movies. And I know that I've done maybe a trope like that where I've said, oh man, that particular trope. I know I've taken a trope and said, boy, I can't stand that. I need to make it better. But you know what? That's one of the huge advantages right now to the indie scene is a lot of us are doing that thing by intentionally calling out the bad trope and then fixing it live. So almost like doing triage to a trope. It was there was I don't want to spoil the book for anybody, but there is a book that I read, and it got to the very end, and I swear I was afraid that it was about to become It Was All a Dream, where the character sending them back to the world was going to say, we're going to send you back. And I'm thinking, oh no, they're going to send them back to the moment when bad things started, and none of this ever happened. And it is my number one least favorite trope of all time is It Was All a Dream. Like that's an easy auto quit. I would have dropped it by multiple stars, if it had done that. And the character says, are you going to send us back to where it starts? And fortunately, the other character says, I'm not doing that to you. You still have to learn from the life that you've had, because your experiences make you up. So I can't send you back to when you started, but you'll send you back now with all your experiences intact. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. You didn't do that. So yeah, that was great. And I've seen now multiple books where it's an intentional call out that here, I'm not going to make it only a dream. I'm not going to do that to you. Please, we're better than that. And that happens in a lot of indie books. So, so good on us for towing that line. Let's see. I know I'm not going to say anything against Joe. I love Joe. And in the end, that's true. Don't we do everything we do based on how irritated we are at other people doing things? I mean, that's Joven in a nutshell. But that's me in a nutshell too. Is I learned to drive late by design, and because of that, I started with a better record, because I was learning from all the mistakes of all my teenage friends and even adults around me, and say, I'm not going to do that. Oh, I'm going to adjust that mistake away. And I think we do that in our writing too. Is take the things that irritate us and either immortalize it and eviscerate it in fiction, or just don't do it, right? Yes, Leaf is based on my son. When I wrote Thrice, he was 4 years old, and that's how old Leaf is at the beginning of the book, is 4. And a lot of what I wrote when I was putting together my outline of my thesis for the story I wanted to write, Alan was saying some just deep things and asking deep questions, and then tracking, and then moving on to his next thing, right? Because he's a little kid. And so I was like, I want a little kid that does that. Okay, so there's your example. There's an example, Jesse. In the Bulgariad, there's a little boy who shows up, Ariand, who all he can say is the word Ariand. And he's like 9 years old. And the reason he can't say much more than that is because he's magically stunted, and then later has more. But I feel like he went from this aimless little kid who had no idea what was going on because he was too innocent, and which means he was stupid, to all of a sudden having fully fleshed and way too smart for like talking like a 60-year-old as a 12-year-old, which there were reasons for it, but I didn't think it was done well. And I've seen other kids, not done well. Like you see a kid that's 9 years old and is acting like a 4-year-old, and it's like that. When I see that in a book, and there's me putting my foot in my mouth, it drives me nuts, because I feel like they've never been around a kid before of the age that they're trying to write, and I always wonder why that occurs. So I said, you know what, I'm going to do that myself. And so I chose to subvert that trope of, I mean, we have lots of magical little kids who are too smart for their own good, but I wanted to do one that was going to be written as I was seeing my 4-year-old act at the time. So yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. No, I don't want to read. I'm going to read from one of my favorite chapters. and it's one that Craig Bookworm quoted on Twitter the other day. Well, I'm actually looking for this spot. Trisha asked if Thrice came before Mando. I wrote Thrice before Mando, and even before Witcher the show had come out. And Trisha and I went down to a con where I got my pitch for Thrice judged by Sanderson himself. And he and other people around me were saying, well, this sounds a lot like The Witcher, which I had never heard of myself. Quickly looked it up and figured out that I could use it as a comp, and then use that to start pitching to agents. And then Mando came out, and Grogu did things that were very similar to Leaf, and so I had to make some adjustments into my my storyline to fix that, because I didn't want to look like I was just ripping off Mandalorian. I personally think the reason I probably was never picked up by Trad is because I was too late. That my book was being pitched as Witcher was coming out, as Mandalorian was coming out. And so because of that, they didn't see it as something they could sell fast enough because, as we all know, traditional publishing is very, very slow. It can take a year to get an agent, a year to pitch it, a year to print it. So by that time, Witcher could have been canceled, or Mandalorian could have been canceled, and so it's just not worth the risk in that case. So yeah, that's what ended up happening, I think, and that's okay. I don't take any offense, because now I'm here, and I am very happy to be where I am at in my publishing journey. All right. Boy, I can't find what I wanted to actually read. Okay. So this is from, I'll take off that question. This is from Thrice after they leave and head towards the Long Wall. And they spent the night in the cave. Papa Jove, Leaf said, rolling over. I'm hungry. There'll be food soon. Leaf saw the fire and leapt up, suddenly awake, and began to crawl over the rocks, exploring the inside of the cave. There was no outlet, save where the spring trickled. A crack that ran up the wall disappeared into the darkness. Leaf slipped on the water-worn surface several times, but suffered no more bruises than any boy tumbling about a field. Within a couple hours, they made their way onto the plain once more. Svedes had dislodged some rocks and tumbled them down into the stream bed below as stepping stones, allowing them all to leave with dry clothes. The wind had died, leaving the landscape a blank parchment of wind-blown white snow. The only scribblings of a heavenly scribe were the dead grass that poked up out of the canvas, while the few bushes illuminated the borders of the page with a story none could read. They moved easily north with no gale to fight them, though their path did not run straight as drifts rose in their way. Leaf spent much of the time on the shoulders of the three men, so they made good time. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, plunging a still cold around them. They approached the end of the long wall, which terminated abruptly. Coming around that final corner revealed a dense black forest, quickly growing darker in the failing light. A thin line of smoke rose up from the forest, indicating someone lived not far within. Joven pressed toward the beacon. As they entered the darkness of the wood, he could make out the single fire of a lantern hanging from a doorframe. I will go to introduce myself, and then the rest of us, Joven said. If we all go, we may receive a cold shoulder. No, Svedes said. You stay. I will go. I know forest tradition. Joven stopped and nodded to the big man. Yeah, I do say nodded a lot. I know there's been a discussion online about whether you should say nodded or sighed instead of just said or whatnot. And the fact is we all do that. Like there's certain things we do, like when we're on stage, that we'll do to indicate who we're talking to. And we do the same thing in writing where we used so and so sighed, because we do sigh, whether we're not audibly sighing in real life, but we will internally sigh. And the reader can see that through the narration. So I use grunted and nodded and sighed quite a bit myself. Yeah, thank you, Jesse. I love Lone Wolf and Cub stories. You see Lone Wolf and Cub in Usagi Yojimbo, which I mentioned as Lone Goat and Kid, which makes a reference to that. And one of my favorite movies is Road to Perdition, with just Tom Hanks and Jude Law and Paul Newman. And it is Lone Wolf and Cub. Like the director writer said, this is Lone Wolf and Cub. It's just told in a Prohibition America. Great movie, and there's just something endearing about that kind of tale. I still need to play the new God of War series, the kind of the restart of the series up in the Northlands with the son and boy. The Road is a book I never actually finished, because it was too dark for me, and I like my father and son duos to be something that has a little bit of hope to it, and that one I just couldn't get into it, and it was a bad time to be reading it in the middle of winter. It was way too depressing for me. So yeah. Oh, Jesse, I've got it on VHS. You can come over and watch it sometime. All right. So Patricia Meredith asks if, because Fourscore is written as a third of the story takes place in an orchard, if I ever lived in an orchard. And that's an interesting question, because yes, I have. I spent my childhood going up to orchards to pick. And then when I got married, my wife, who is Patricia Meredith, and I would go up and pick at orchards. And then we were very blessed to live 4 years on an orchard until this last year, learning how to do grafting and gardening, and we just had all of the fruit we could pick from. So that had a huge influence on me for writing Fourscored, is I wanted to have a story that was in a small orchard, and captured some of that normalcy. I always talk about writing scenes of normalcy, and that I wanted to have a whole section of normalcy. And while it's not nearly as depressing as a Russian play, a lot of Russian stories will be take place in an orchard, whether it's in Dr. Zhivago or in The Cherry Orchard, the Russian play. So I wanted to capture some of that so I wasn't just saying it was Slavic in the first book, and then after that, it's just a story. I still wanted to make sure that there were some of those tropes in a place for a framework for me to put those tropes in there, like the new monsters that show up in Fourscored, which are the Vedi and the Krasnal. The Vedi are basically 15-foot tall Sasquatch. They maybe, if they really did exist, they could be Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti. But they're a big hairy man, and they're 15 feet tall, and they kind of do what Frankenstein's monster did in the book, pulling up the potatoes out of the frozen ground. And they would do that in mythology, as they would come and protect a farm and do some of the labor, and stack wood when you couldn't get to it because you broke a leg. So they're always very benevolent. And then Krasnal, I forget what the actual origin of the name is, but I think it's a gnome of one of the Eastern nations. But there's stories of these gnomes or Krasnals that are basically little clay gnomes, like little clay gnomes that look like wet clay. And and when I was putting those in, I also was thinking about the Ginger Mud Man in Grimm Brothers Grimm movie, the child that becomes the mud creature, and it's the gingerbread man representation in that movie. So I wanted that kind of that little evil little wickedness to occur. So that's where those came from. While there's no Vedmak in book 2, they will be coming back in the book after that. So we've not, the Medved are the bear people. So we'll get to see quite a bit more of those come book 3. So I'm very, very excited to do that and kind of dive into their culture, because it's fun to do that sort of culture study. Is studying how a culture, especially non-human one, is going to be different and have different values than humans will. So yeah. All right. What is everybody else reading right now besides my books? What are you reading right now? I really want to. My wife just picked this up at a con this weekend, which is a Untamed Bestiary that a local artist did. And I've just been looking through this, and it's definitely something I want to do. To be able to do something like this, or like Guelph, which is a different era, and it's another anthropomorphic. I have a fan of these, but it's kind of a guide to the world. It'd be fun to do that sort of thing. But I'm going to be going even farther than that because I am a former board game designer, and I would love to do some war games or board games based not only about the world, but also the games you see in the world being played. Thrice, Joven and Leaf does not have nearly as many. Doesn't have any actually board games, I think, in it. I need to fix that. Because Joven's not a game player, I think, compared to others. So, but I really want to do some in-game board games that we can get produced and go from there. Quinn is reading Way of Adon. I am 4 chapters into it. I'm one of the reasons I don't do reading readathons anymore is because I'm so erratic in my reading, because I try to read as much as I can, but if I get on a roll writing, it all stops. I can't, not only because it can influence my writing, but because I just get obsessed and I just start writing. So but right now Way of Adon is on my top, to the top of my reading list. Cool. I hadn't heard of that one. That's cool. Is My Dear Hamilton, is it a fictionalized account, or is it a biography? And yes, Quinn, I will be doing board games. In the books, you see Edaphos, which is actually Edaphos is what it's called. Sorry, the original game was actually the second game I ever designed before I became a professional board game designer. Was Edaphos. I need to redesign it now that I know what I'm doing as a board game designer, and make it so that it can be played with 4 or 6 players, like in the 2, 4, 6 players, like in the books. But you'll also start to see there's another game that's really big for the Hrelgrin race, which is basically I describe it as chess meets Magic and Pokemon, because it's a collectible game. Like it's chess, but you curate your own side, and you put tiles that give each piece an extra ability. So I need to actually design that. So that's definitely going to happen. And then there's references all throughout the Collation Saga of the Protectorate Wars. And one of my life goals is to do a war game based inside of the Protectorate Wars. So that will be coming once I can get around to designing it. Yeah. Let's see. Pick another thing to read out of Foursquare. I assume you're talking about my Ninja Turtles. The Hrogrins have two primary influences, and that is Ninja Turtles and the Tau of Warhammer 40,000. So those were huge influences in that. So yes, you are right. Those are Hrogrins. All right. So this is from Fourscored, chapter 5, Harvest Feast. Stefa came around the table from her father's side and stood across from Joven. Everyone is dancing, she said. Do you dance? There are plenty of others here to dance with. You do not need a man who cannot keep a beat. For one, Stefa said, many of them are too frightened to ask me. For another, you're a smith, and I've heard the rhythm you strike the metal with. Are you too afraid to ask me? I'm not, Joven said, but I also don't seek to go above my station. Dancing does not presume an attempt to reach above one's station, nor am I above yours. You are the daughter of my host, Joven said, glancing over to Voss, who had moved down the table to talk animatedly with another orchard owner. Go on, Papa Jove, Leaf said, laughing. I've never seen you dance. A boy who has never seen his father dance, that is a boy who has never experienced joy. Foolish joy, Joven said. Foolishness does not make the fool, Stefa quoted the old proverb. Feigning wisdom and unnecessary sternness does. Joven gave a small smile, rose, and said, One dance. That's all I ask, she said. He came around the table, and her arm fell into his. The music suddenly shifted to a more lively cadence. Oh, Joven said, this is too fast. You can't dance to this? It has been some time, Joven said. They fell into line with other couples who now circled the room arm in arm. You know the steps of the Goyat, obviously, Stefa remarked. I do, Joven said. My sister made me learn it. You have a sister, then? I did. She's gone. I'm sorry to hear that. Was Leaf hers? He is not. His family is dead. I am all he has now. Then he is lucky. The music changed. The couples turned to the center, came together, and then walked back out into a circle, tugging each other along as the tempo increased. Stefa dropped Joven's hand, and he was now strolling with another woman. Each man looked back over his shoulder, giving style glances to the woman he had been separated from. Then the women dropped their arms, came to the center, and took each other's hands in a smaller circle as the men clapped. Joven watched Stefa fly around the circle, laughing as the women ran faster and faster until one of them broke the circle. And they all flew together with one another, spinning and clapping their hands as partners found them. Some returning to their original partners, others took the opportunity to switch. You found me. You found me, Stefa said breathlessly. You could have taken up another partner. I said I would dance with you, Joven said. I'm not on this floor to dance with another. The music stopped and he gave it a small bow. Thank you for dancing with me, she said with a coy smile. Unless you'd like to dance another. I should return to Leaf now. If you ever wish to take another stroll with me, you may. She gave him a comfortable smile. Joven turned to the table as his ears grew hot and he went to sit next to Leaf. That was fun to watch, Leaf said. Drink your cider, boy. So, little introduction of most important new character in the series, which is Stefa. Trisha asks who else is up there. I've got Uncle Iroh and Willy Wonka and the Riddler. And then this is the only Lego set that I've not let the kids have. We were very glad we collected a bunch of the Lego sets before we had kids for Lord of the Rings for them to play with. But this is my Hobbit hole. Some dwarves here at the feast, along with, Bilbo and Gandalf outside. And then I've got some of my old. Well, here's Usagi Yojimbo right here. I've got some of my old Bucky O'Hare. If you really want to go deep, Bucky O'Hare was a contemporary cartoon to Ninja Turtles. So I got those. And then you can't see him off screen is my buddy. Hi, guys. Magonzo. So this was I've actually I don't know if I ever grabbed myself to do it, but I did see somebody who took one of these replicas and was able to make him into a puppet by hollowing him out and making him into a puppet. Yeah, they're very hard to come by. I'm glad we got them when we did. So it's my Gonzo, and I need to do another photo shoot with him sometime. Yeah. So when I get bored, I'll pull down my action figures and start playing with them and pose them, and especially when I'm watching YouTube or waiting for something to load. I don't know what kind of games you're all playing right now, but right now I'm doing a replay through of Banner Saga. If you want a story-driven game that will change you, not only in its story but in its amazing music, you've got to look up Banner Saga. It's on Steam. Came out several years ago. They did a Kickstarter like 3 years in a row for it, and because there's 3 different chapters to it, you play one at a time, and really good, really good game. And then what am I currently working on? So I have a whole board of all the things I'm working on. I only ever draft one thing at a time, but I keep several projects open in case I hit a block. I can switch to another project for a couple weeks. Right now, I am writing Collation 4, because Collation 3 is with the editor. As soon as Collation 3 comes back, I will be I'll fix the edits that the editor has, and then I will start recording it, because I really want to get that out sooner rather than later. I'm shooting for August. I would really like to get it out in July, maybe the last week of July or so. We'll see what happens with that. But Collation 3, I have written it, and so it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be coming out this summer. So I'm writing Collation 4 right now. My goal is to have it out. I would love to have it out before Christmas. It is probably more likely to be early 2024, very early 2024. And I'm about a quarter of the way through writing the first draft of Collation 4. And then when I finish that, I will be outlining the sequel to Fourscored, Fife and Drum. I have to outline that. And I have a novella that I'm trying to finish, which is a Collation novella. It's actually not the prelude. It's not. It is a prelude story, but it's actually the postlude to the Protectorate Wars. It takes place 70 years before Collation 1, and so I got to finish that up so I can release that between book 3 and 4. So that one I should have no problem probably releasing by the end of the year as a novella. And then I have some Hrogran stories that I'm working on. I've written one, almost a novella. It's more of a novelette, and one other short story for an anthology I'm in. But I'm going to be writing a whole bunch of Hrogran-based stories that there's almost no humans in them, and it's a kind of an odd story. But basically, it's a police procedural that's just about Hrograns living in a Hrogran city. So it's more of a culture study. And fun for myself. I'll release those stories. I think I've got 5 or 6 in what will be the first set. I'll release them every couple months. I'm not quite sure how I'll release them yet. I would like to be able to maybe do a Patreon or something and give them out to patrons. And then at the very end, I'll compile them and print them as a book. So that's what I'm working on right now. And that's more than enough to keep me busy for a while. After Collation 4, I would like to do a trilogy of the Protectorate Wars, as going back and telling that story before I move on to Collation Saga 5 through 8, which will finish the first major story. So people are always asking how many books are there in the Collation Saga. There will be 8, with some breaks with Protectorate Wars, and there will be more stories after that story. But the Collation Saga, as it stands, is an 8-book story that will have a full conclusion before the next story starts, a generation later. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. Joe says he's got the same Hobbit set. It's such a good set, and I so wish right now that I had the money to buy the new Rivendell set, which is just amazing. There's already people coming out with some like upgrade Lego sets for like lighting it with lightable Legos. That's a really good set. That would be something I would also not ever disassemble. My kids have got my whole Helm's Deep set. But fortunately, my son is very good with Legos and keeping them, so I'm not ever worried about them disappearing. So someday when he gets older, it'll probably get made up into its full set and then just put up on a shelf at some point. But until then, I want him to build as many castles as he can. So yeah, all right. Well, we are nearing the end of an hour, and I think that's probably a pretty good place to stop. But if anybody has any more questions, please let me know, and we can. Cover that. Any questions? I think that pretty much covers it. So I'll close up here by saying thank you first so much for coming and hanging out with me as I talk to the void and to you, and thank you for the congratulations. Fourscored is out today. It's in all 4 formats anywhere books are sold. I know Silverstone might still have a couple copies left of signed Thrice and Fourscored. You can always contact me. I've got audiobooks literally everywhere you can listen to an audiobook. It's on there, from Spotify, Apple. Even if you want to use your Audible coins, you can do that too. Ebooks are available literally everywhere, from wherever you like to buy them, all across the world. And then physicals are, of course, available, like I said, through Silverstone, signed through Amazon, through myself. Happy to get you hooked up with them. Just let me know, and keep reading. And I got more books coming. I'm not slowing down, and I'll even finish some series for you. So thank you again so much for coming, and have a wonderful night. And here's to more Needle and Leaf in the future. Have a great day. Bye. There it goes. Okay.